He kōna ipurangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
I have never known how not to exhaust myself. So, I go as hard as I possibly can. So, it's it's hard when you're going hard.
Hi, I'm Jesse Mulligan, and this is Sports History NZ. Erin Baker was simply an incredible triathlete, one of the very best ever. She won almost every race she entered, and she used her fame and influence to demand equal pay for men and women, often protesting by refusing to compete. Early in 2024, I spoke to Erin about her incredible career. She's known for being humble, and I asked her if she went out of her way to avoid talking about her success.
I try my best not to. Yes, that would be right. Yeah.
Plenty of champions do. That's the model, right? You have a few years of victories, and then a few more good years on the speaking circuit, going and recounting the best bits for anyone who's interested.
Well, yes, but I tend to think that not very many people are interested, and you hear it start getting very bored by the sound of your own voice. So I tried very hard not to do that.
Well, we're very interested, and we're particularly interested in how it all started. You grew up in Kaiapoi. Can you tell us a bit about your life as a kid, and were you a sporting family, sporting child?
We were a large family, my working class family, and because my father was involved in just basically digging out the first swimming pool in Kaiapoi, I think we got to use the pool for free. So anyway, we all just became swimmers. That's what we did.
Wow.
From a very young age, we just became swimmers. And that was just sort of the story of our, as we got better, our father would be, either taking us to Rangiora Pool or later as things went on into Christchurch. And so we just became swimmer kids, mainly probably because we had to. Some of us enjoyed it more than others, but you just did what you were told then.
What was the pool your dad dug out?
Oh, just the first Kaiapoi swimming pool. I mean, him and a whole lot of other people, but I think that's the way things happened back then. There was a lot of community involvement to get, little community facilities going.
Yeah, public pool, hey?
Just a public pool.
Yeah.
Yep. It's not there anymore. There's a new pool in the same place.
Okay.
But yeah, it was. Yeah,
and probably not created in quite the same way, given how the world has changed. And
definitely not.
You had a bit of a connection to the Labour Party too, I think, in the 70s. Did your mum work with Norman Kirk?
My mum's dad worked for Norman Kirk, so he worked for him. I think for many years, and that was really, where my dad's and then my mother's sort of. Probably my mother's activism stemmed from her socialist values back in the day, which came from sort of working class roots.
Yeah. Your first triathlon was 1984, I think, but I want to briefly mention 1981 because the Springbok Tour loomed large in your life.
Yes, well, it did. And we were certainly, at that stage, sort of a large Catholic sort of socialistly value-based family, if you like. My mum was very big on sort of doing the right thing. We did a lot of community stuff, and she worked for Corso and all sorts of organisations. And so when the Springbok Tour, came about, it was just sort of, we knew about apartheid and right and wrong in life. And so it seemed just a natural thing to be on the side of thinking that we shouldn't support, a racist regime that had apartheid rules in place. And so that was just sort of almost like, getting up and going to church on Sunday. You just thought, well, this is the right thing to do, or you should do it maybe, and you did it. So, yeah, I was very involved. And through that, I got some convictions, some which I was rightly convicted of, sort of civil disobedience, and others that I was wrongly, but that's a long gone story now. And sort of that ended up affecting a little bit of my first and early years involved in triathlon.
Yeah. There was an incident with a bus, I think.
Yeah. Incident with a bus, yes, yes. So, stopping a bus in Nelson, trying to get it to not go to the sporting venue of wherever it was, Trafalgar Park, or wherever where the game was being played. So yes, that was all before the age of 21, I think.
Gosh. So you moved to Sydney, and I think that is the although obviously you mentioned that you were always pretty sporting, athletic, and a swimmer, but it was the move to Sydney that was the first step towards competing in triathlons. Can you tell us about that time in your life?
Yeah, well, I did move to Sydney. I had, I've talked about, had been a swimmer kid. After that, though, I actually had been a runner kid. Sort of in my teens, I became quite a good runner, though, not the greatest, but pretty good. And then, with what happens when you're 18, 19, 20, you study and you sort of give sport away, or you whatever else people do. And so I hadn't done a lot. So I ended up in Sydney, living actually in the middle of Sydney, and I think working out on the beaches. And so I sort of started to get into a bit of a regime of biking to work, and then I sort of got into a regime of biking to work and sometimes running home.
Gosh.
Which was, I can't exactly remember, but it was around about 30k.
Oh,
You couldn't even bike that way now, right through the freeway under the airport.
yeah.
It was crazy, really. But then I sort of got into being fitter again, and then I saw a sort of, an ad for a triathlon. It was called the Royal National Parks. And I thought, well, yep, I can give that a go. I can swim, run and bike. And so that's what I did. I did that event, and it was quite a long event, and sort of did it, won it, said I'd never do another. But then the following week, I can't quite remember if I went up to the Gold Coast or to Cairns, because I had an uncle living in Cairns, because it was another triathlon up there, and did that and won that, and did a few more and won those. And yeah, and then
Well, hang on. Why did you say
really,
you were never going to do one again? Was it because it was that
oh, because
hard?
they're hard.
Yeah.
Because they're hard. And that event was reasonably long, like, near on a 4-hour event, or maybe 3.5 hours. And, I have never known how not to exhaust myself. So, I go as hard as I possibly can. So, it's hard when you're going hard. And, at the end of it, you're shattered and you think, well, what did you do that for? But I sort of got the passion for it straight away and thought, oh, okay, maybe I will give another one a go. And then I started earning little bits and pieces of prize money along the way. So that certainly egged me on.
Yeah, I can imagine. And would have been nice pocket money as well as the regular salary you were picking up as a radiographer.
Yes, exactly, indeed.
So what was your first big win?
Well, about not much longer after that. I can't remember years. I've never been good on years, but either the same year or the next year, there was a event that was going to happen in Australia, and I knew in triathlon then about the sport and the people who were the best at it around the world, and it was sort of growing in huge popularity amongst the people that knew about multi-sports. And I decided I would enter that. It was an Ironman event, which I thought was a very long way to go, because it's 3.8 swim, 180 bike, 42 run. But I thought that would be something to train for and maybe lose some weight for, because I was a little chubby 21-year-old, 22-year-old. And so I actually went back to New Zealand to live free with my parents and train for it, probably, 6 months or so.
Gosh.
And came back to that event in Australia, and I won it. And that was sort of a big deal, because there was prize money. All the top Americans and other people from around the world were there. It was a big deal in a little sport. And
won it by 40 minutes, I should say.
Yeah, I did run it by a bit. So I found my wee, sort of niche, and I got a little bit of publicity, and, it sort of set me on my way.
Yeah, gosh. And was there a sort of a circuit, an international circuit at that stage? It was realistic for you to do just that?
Well, there was a good circuit in America, but because of the Springbok Tour conviction, I sort of didn't even consider that.
Ah,
But there was a good circuit also going in Europe, and a friend and colleague, and that became my coach, John Hallemans, was very much aware of that circuit. And so anyway, we made a plan to get over to Europe, which I did. And there were a lot of races. I started racing. I won, I think, a European half distance championship. Then I got a big sponsor. I was really surprised because I was sort of had people with cell phones ringing me, and I on a landline saying they were driving to come and talk to me about a contract, and they had BMW and all that sort of stuff. It seemed a big deal at those days.
yeah.
And so a company called Le Coq Sportif signed me up.
Wow, I remember them.
They were great actually for me because they promoted me heavily, and I went from most weekends in the summer, or in European summer, there were races, and we actually travelled as a team, Le Coq Sportif team. Had all the frills. They paid for everything, and hotels and races and really cool venues all around, Europe and Berlin, and before the wall came down, and in France, and all through the place. And it was fun. I really enjoyed it, and so I did that for maybe 2 seasons before things changed a bit, whereby I got a call from a guy who was a huge event promoter that I'd heard of, and he wanted me to go and do the Hawaiian Ironman. And I remember getting this call in France, and he said, I said, well, I can't get a visa, and he said he would leave that to him. And the long and short of that story was he did get me a visa, and I did go to America and went to Hawaii and etc.
Can you tell me about your approach to training?
Well, I wasn't sophisticated in as much as nowadays. It's heart monitors, and everyone has a sort of a threshold that they work on or towards, or heart rate, or those sorts of things. But I've always been very, very pragmatic, and probably I have a very good intuition about myself. So you would just look at what events were coming up, or what I was aiming towards, and so I'm pretty renowned. For example, when I was in Christchurch in the South Island, if I was training for an Ironman, I would do bikes. Like I'd bike to Akaroa and back from Christchurch, or I'd bike to Ashburton and back, and then I'd run around the circumference of the hills. And I used to sort of go long, short, hard, fast, and slower. So I just have this what you call a periodic sort of thing, where you go one day hard, next day long.
That was mostly
short,
intuitive, was it, Erin? Or was it based on a sort of scientific approach? Yeah.
No, it wasn't based on a scientific approach really at all. Not till I sort of got more involved with John Hallemans, who sort of made it more of a scientific approach. But it probably didn't change a lot for me. I mean, I'd go and be told to do reps on the track at whatever pace, but I have always liked to push as hard as I can. So I will go as hard as I possibly can, even if I'm only meant to be doing 90%. It's just the way I am, which served me well in most times. I have a good genetics because I never really got injured. And once, when I was training on the track in Boulder, running much faster than I was meant to be running, Robert De Costello came up to me and said, "You should do a running race next weekend," which I duly did, and I won it. So it's just how I sort of am. I try to train as hard as I possibly can. I did try to train as hard. I pushed myself. I still push myself, and I guess it's just my DNA that I try to do everything as well as I can, and most of the time it's worked in my favour, and occasionally it hasn't.
Is that just a sporting thing, or did you find when you went into, you were in politics for a while, but also in business, achieved quite a lot in business, did you find that same sort of part of your brain lighting up in terms of the effort you would put in?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I remember one week in my business career, having 11 flights in New Zealand, and one day I flew to Auckland and back from Christchurch twice. I mean, if I thought that I could do a bit more that day, or I had left something not done well, I sort of have it in me to see if I can do more. And it's as I said, most of the time it works well for you. Occasionally it backfires, but I just have that sort of drives my friends nuts now. Most people won't bike with me or swim with me or whatever I do these days, but I try to be good with my friends these days. I try to realise that not everyone wants to kill themselves on a bike ride. We're over 60 now.
Do you and your husband run together or exercise together?
No, we very occasionally parallel in what we're doing. But like most husbands and wives, you're each other. You love and hate each other the most. So we tend to steer clear of each other. Exercising, we see enough of each other as it is.
Yeah, he's a triathlete too. Do you mind sharing the story of how you met and got together?
Well, it was actually a funny story, really, because I'd won quite a few events, and I can't really remember the year it was that we met. But gosh, let's see if I must have been in 61, about 71, 81, around 90, maybe 87. And I had probably done a good 6 years of triathlon by then. And I'd won a lot of things and I was pretty happy with what I'd done.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel I had any real new motivations to do more. So I was at the point where I was actually coming back to New Zealand. I had been in Europe and I stopped by a race in Provo, Utah. And Provo, Utah is, the Mormon capital of the world. And the reason why that's funny is because, I sort of met up with Scott in a hotel lift and, he said, do you want to come out on a date? Well, a date in Provo, Utah, the maximum you could ever do there was, go and sit and watch a movie. We went and watched Moonstruck with Cher.
Oh, good one, yeah.
And good movie. I was then meant to be coming back to New Zealand. I had a ticket out of there, but in those days things were different. And I had a friend that I knew well in triathlon. She lived in Boulder, and she had a spare. She was not flying back to Colorado, but she had a ticket to fly back. And she said, she sort of maybe twinged that I was a little bit besotted with Scott Molina, and she said, "Look, take my ticket. He's on the same flight as me." Or not this flight she wasn't taking, and so I got her ticket, and I remember calling Rick Wells because he was at the same race, and I hadn't even packed my bike, and I had a rental car, and I'm flying around wanting to make this flight like you wouldn't believe, and screamed up to the airport, left my car at the front door like you're not meant to do, and Scott sort of tells the story now how he saw me out of the car. My bike over one shoulder and my big bag over the other shoulder, my neck straining like, God, I've got it. And he said he knew he'd never be rid of me.
Oh, that's lovely.
Oh, isn't that sweet?
And he was happy
that was it.
At some stage to move back here to New Zealand?
Yeah, well, he was more keen than I, actually. He loved New Zealand, and he just sort of the safety aspect of it and raising, family here. I actually at that stage loved Colorado. I loved this, the place we live. But yes, we moved back to New Zealand, and that's been wonderful.
Yeah, cool. Well, he would have been earning more than you for a triathlon win back in those days, because that was just kind of how it was in the 80s, right? And it seemed, well, speaking generally here, it seemed kind of normal. And you thought, no, I don't think that is normal. I don't think that's right.
Yeah, well, I had a couple of interesting situations because, before most people knew I'd, what's the terminology, hooked up with Scott. That people didn't know that. And I remember he was sort of the star a couple of years in a row at the New Zealand Ironman when it was being raced in Auckland. And I remember, I won't name names, but the people who were promoting the event at the time, contacted me. Because I didn't always do Ironmans. I did a lot of short and middle distance events as well. And, of course, I'd be racing overseas in our winter. And so I didn't always want to do a lot of races here. And, they said, well, we really, would love you to do the, Auckland Ironman and da-da-da. And I said, oh, yeah, okay, well, I can, think about it. It doesn't really fit with my training, but, And I said, so, what about an appearance fee or something like that? And they're like, oh, no, we're not doing appearance fees. No, we don't do appearance fees. We never have, and we're not going to. And I said, oh, that's interesting, because my now boyfriend, Scott Molina, is getting $5,000. And they're like, oh. And I said, so, I'll come for the same amount. So that was sort of, it was interesting that people weren't honest, because of course, I suppose it's similar in a lot of events. I mean, I think that things like appearance fees and that prize money is obvious because they have to advertise it, but with athletes and elite athletes, there's often appearance fees, and that's something that no one really knows who's getting what. So that was that. But equally on the converse, I remember also when I was negotiating with Le Coq Sportif, and I had no idea what to ask for, no idea whatsoever, because they were off wanting me to have a 3-year contract with them. And I did ring Scott Molina, and this was before actually we were dating. And I said, well, would you mind giving me some sort of guidelines here? Anyway, he said that he was getting X amount of dollars from a sponsor at the time. It was, I can't remember which sponsor. So when I was talking to Le Coq Sportif, I said, yep, this is how would this go? And they're like, oh, okay, yep, that sounds all right. But it was then when I talked to Scott Molina some months after, he said to me, how did that contract negotiation go? And I said, yep, that went great, thank you. I got that amount of money per year for 3 years. And he's like, what? No, I told you to get that amount of money over the 3-year period. And I was like, oh, well, didn't I do well?
Oh, wow.
So I actually ended up getting triple what supposedly he was getting at the time.
Great.
So,
great.
It was, yeah. But
Love
yes,
that.
prize money's
But
always been an interesting thing.
Yeah, and it's one thing to protest, but you actually, actions speak louder than words, right? You would not go to races if the prize money wasn't equal.
Yeah, well, I can't say I was always virtuous, because to be honest, triathlon has always been incredibly equal. Certainly the Le Coq Sportif series, it always was. A lot of the European races, I think they were, were equal. The ones that weren't, and that did happen a few times, and they would say, well, look, if you win, we'll pay you the same amount as the men, but that you must keep that to yourself. So those were the events I didn't go to. I said, well, no, unless you're going to advertise that the women's is the same as the men, because I did have that several times. People would say to me, look, keep quiet and don't tell everybody, but if you win, we'll give you the same as we're giving the men. And I just feel that wasn't, it just wasn't right. Everybody, everyone's doing the same work out there. Everyone's working their tail off, training their tail off. But the issue that most female sports have, and probably still have, is the depth of payment. That they'll say, well, men will pay them 20 deep and women 10 deep. And that was certainly the case when, men's numbers were much higher than women's numbers. And those ones, I sort of felt that was fair enough. Mm-hmm. But then over the years, a lot of women have sort of, come up, said, but if we need to make sure there's this equal depth in prize money to promote women more in sport, so that more and more people enter. And of course nowadays a lot of events, triathlon, but many sports, there's more women competitors than men. So that has equaled out now in most cases, I believe.
Some athletes, I'm talking to Erin Baker, and we're almost up on time, but some athletes, Erin, are motivated by statistics. I'm thinking about another great Cantabrian athlete, Richard Hadley. He loved keeping track of what he had done, and he'd use it as a way of motivating him for the next test. But I feel like you're not that person. You don't really keep track of dates or times or even results in some situations, but
even trophies.
even trophies. So can I ask you, is there a moment in your triathlon career that you remember more fondly than all the rest?
The problem with this question is my biggest highlight in my entire life was winning a very large, big running race in the United States. That was actually my biggest highlight ever.
Yeah. Because
I was a mad, keen runner and I loved running. I thought it was the purest of sports. But if I'm to look back honestly, one of my best wins, but one of my poorest performances was the Commonwealth Games triathlon, where we were a demonstration sport, and I bitterly did not want to go to that event because I really wanted to run I think it was 10,000 or 5,000. And I got fourth for the Commonwealth Games qualifying for that event.
You're talking about the 1990 Auckland Commonwealth Games, yeah?
Yes, yeah. So I missed the spot for the running, 5 or 10,000, I can't remember which one, by one spot. And so I bitterly didn't want to do the triathlon because I don't know, I felt that people thought running was a much more real event. Mm-hmm. Anyway, only because my dad asked me to, I did the Commonwealth Games triathlon, and he actually took the train up there. I can't remember from Christchurch, but when I won that event, even though I was reasonably unfit and hadn't wanted to do it, I felt a lot more pride in the sport that I was involved in, and that people had a real sense that I was an elite athlete in an elite sport, and I think that gave me enormous satisfaction.
Great. Why did you give it away?
Simply had enough, done enough, was absolutely over it, didn't need to do any more, and just knew there were other things in my life I wanted to do.
And you ended up doing them. Your business, in case people are interested, is orthopedic parts, is that right?
It was orthopedic implants, but I'm not in that business anymore. I sold out of that a few years ago. And now I'm the life and leisure retired.
You've deserved that too. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. I've really enjoyed the chat. And thank you for all the pride that you have created in New Zealanders over the years. We were so proud of you at the time. You're in the Sports Hall of Fame. And thank you for the memories.
You're welcome. Thanks for the interview. It's been lovely. Thank you, Jesse.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Sports History NZ, and special thanks to Erin Baker for being my guest. Sports History NZ was produced by Melita Tull, Ayana Piper-Helian, Sally Ward and Sam Hollis. The podcast was put together by Justin Gregory. Tim Watkin is RNZ's executive producer of podcasts and series. And there are plenty more amazing stories just like this one from our sporting past for you to follow and listen to. You can find them at Apple Podcasts, iHeart, Spotify, or wherever you found this podcast.